The Shooting Range. In this episode, forget about infantry, let's wreck some tanks. How to play in the BMP-1. The story of Geoffrey de Havilland and his wooden planes. Hotline. The developers answer questions that you've left in the comments. But first, let's start with one war is over, another is coming. What tanks were supposed to beat the Soviet aggression? After World War II, European countries divided into two factions and were preparing for a new conflict. This time, it was the USSR against Western European countries. Soviet war theoretics suggested that the war would start with the nuclear bombardment of enemy territories, and then there would be a tank rush of the T-54s and T-62s through Poland and into France. With that in mind, German and French tank specialists decided that heavily protected tanks would be of no use, since even the thickest armor couldn't save the tank from the new enemy weapons, not to mention the nuclear strikes. Instead, they recommended losing the armor and increasing speed and gun power. Light and deadly tanks were supposed quickly to get to the spot and destroy the groups of T-54s before anybody could see them. So, in the mid-1950s, Germany and France began a collaborative development of the new main battle tanks using this concept. These new machines had to meet the new specifications: 30 tons of weight, engine capacity of 900 horsepower, a top speed of 65 kilometers per hour, and a 105mm gun. The tank was named Standardpanzer, a standard European tank. The Germans created three design teams, A, B, and C, each developing its own project. The fourth design team was working in France. The idea was to test all the projects and launch production for the best one. Team C created a very unusual tank. Its caterpillars were dismountable. Without them, 4 of 5 wheel pairs were leading. The hydraulic suspension allowed a change in the clearance and a lowering of the tank until the hull almost touched the earth. The power plant consisted of 4 engines with a total capacity of 1,500 horsepower with an additional 2 backup engines. There was also a very compact stabilized turret hosting a rigged gun with an autoloader. Unfortunately, this project was too advanced and the prototype wasn't built in time for the tests. But the more traditional options from Teams A and B were quite ready without delay. The Team A tank was developed by engineers from Porsche. It existed in 2 variants, one with a 90mm and the other with a 105mm gun. They had 7 road wheels on each side and torsion suspension. Team B was working under the supervision of the Ruhrstahl concern. It had 6 road wheels per side and 2 variants of suspension, hydropneumatic and one using plate springs. The French project was all the way different from the German ones. It was smaller and lighter and had only 5 road wheels per side. Contrarily, it had a longer gun barrel. After the tests, the French decided to go it alone and launch production of their project as the AMX-30 tank. As for the Germans, they picked the best project from Team A and launched its production under the name Leopard. Now that's quite symbolic, as the Porsche concern was the one to start the tradition of giving animal names to armored vehicles. By the way, their first tank ever was also called the Leopard, and it started the famous Tiger family. As for the new Leopard, it became the first post-war German serial production tank. It was also the first German MBT. And now let's take a closer look at the new BMP-1. One of the heralds of the modern era in Update 1.71 is the famous BMP-1 infantry fighting vehicle. It's quite maneuverable, but sort of defenseless. It has very thin armor, which is a gift for any interceptor pilot. It's also quite big, and the short-barreled gun depression is not great either. How is it even in the same line with the T-54, the Leopards, and the M60? Well, as you might have guessed, the BMP-1 is not what it seems. First of all, it has 4 ATGMs with a very quick reload rate that can pierce an astonishing 400 millimeters of armor. These ATGMs make the BMP-1 a serious threat for its enemies, even at large distances. Yes, these are the first-gen rockets, but that means it's even easier to fire from behind hills. The main weapon here is a short-barreled gun that fires anti-tank grenades, and they can pierce up to 300 millimeters of armor as well. Even the top machines of Tier 5 and 6 can't survive those. But keep in mind that the ballistics here are a bit tricky. The projectiles fly with a high-angle trajectory, so you need to practice long-range fire. On the other hand, you can bombard your enemies even if they're hiding behind a hill or some other obstacle. A bit more advice on how to play this machine. Try not to play at the front line. You won't always be able to penetrate your enemy's frontal armor, and you definitely won't appreciate meeting a random anti-aircraft gun. Your place is in the flanks, where you can support your teammates and keep clear of the main battle. Use your speed to be the first at a dominating position, but don't rush to capture a point. Wait for the enemy to show up and make a mistake. Don't use the ATGMs in close combat. The aim there is a bit elevated by default, so there's a big chance you'll miss a close target. Aim to kill. The grenades haven't got a lot of explosive inside, and you might not survive any enemy return fire. And now let's go to Great Britain and look at the work of a master of flying wood. Geoffrey de Havilland and his chief engineer Ronald Bishop were considered oddballs in their time for denying the obvious. Everybody knew that the duraluminum load factor is way better than even in the lightest and sturdiest wood. But these two guys kept insisting that if one could use a more creative approach, they could design a mixed construction aircraft that would be better than a full metal one. Nobody took them seriously until they presented to the Air Ministry an aircraft that was faster than both the Spitfire and the Messerschmitt Bf 109, the Mosquito, a wooden, two-engined aircraft created by a unique technology using a whole range of specially processed wood types. The aircraft became a huge star. It was used as a bomber, a nighttime fighter, and a scout, and gained a lot of love from the Allies and a lot of hatred from the Germans. But the two-seater Mosquito was designed more as a tactical bomber and not a fighter or a strike aircraft. And as it was at a time when RAF bombers were flying all the more deeply into occupied Europe, and the fight against Japan in the Pacific was about to begin as well, Great Britain needed a high-velocity multipurpose fighter, long-range, with two engines. The Americans had their P-38 Lightning that was an ideal manifestation of this concept, but the price was all too high, and the British government were already in great debt. They had no intention to pay for it, so they ordered the creation of an all-British fighter. Geoffrey de Havilland and Ronald Bishop started the development without any terms of reference, and decided to use the Mosquito concept as a base for the new fighter. Project DH-103 looked something like its predecessor, but really the engineers were creating a whole new aircraft. They designed a new, shorter fuselage with a one-seat cockpit and a bubble canopy. They reduced the wing span and area and gave it a laminar flow airfoil that resembled the one in the American P-51 Mustang. They considered many engines, just to return to the one that started it all, the newest and the most perfect model of the Rolls-Royce Merlin. At the time, it had a capacity over 2,000 horsepower, and finally, the counter-rotating propellers that compensated any torque reactions. Just like in the Lightning, the bomb hatches were switched with large fuel tanks. Now, the estimated flight range of the new fighter was about 2,600 miles. The aircraft was lighter and smaller than the Mosquito and reached speeds of 435 mph near the ground during the very first test flight. The Air Ministry was delighted, but had to at least pretend that they were working by the book. They announced the series of reference for the new fighter that were taken exactly from the parameters of the new one-seater Mosquito. They gave the all-British long-range fighter the name Hornet and launched its production as quickly as they could. The Hornet was a very promising air predator that arrived too late for the war. Germany capitulated in the spring of 1945, and Japan didn't linger as well, and they just couldn't get the Hornets to the front lines in time. The planes only got to participate in a couple of local Asian conflicts and then ended up serving in the Royal Air Force till the mid-50s. After that, all Hornet-type aircraft were scrapped to be switched with the jets. But in War Thunder, the Mosquito's little brother is now in the skies, and we don't recommend taking it on. It has 4 guns and a whole arsenal of rockets and bombs that are waiting for new victims. Get ready for the traditional last part of our show, Hotline. Developers answering questions from the comments. The first question comes from Alex Bennett. Are AP bombs, such as the Japanese ones, modeled to do more damage against ships than HE bombs would, due to them wrecking the insides of the ship instead of the exterior? Hello, Alex. Good question. In general, it works like this. AP shells and bombs have a smaller blast radius, but are better at penetrating armor. Naturally, if you use them, it's significantly easier to get to the insides of armored naval targets. A player called G.E. Merck asks, how will Rank 6 affect naval forces? In its present way, it doesn't really affect naval forces at all. As we mentioned before, tanks will meet ships in battle only and maybe during special events. And if you're asking about our plans for Rank 6 naval forces, it's just a bit early to tell. We have to figure out Rank 6 aviation first. Then there's a question from Hugo Troop. It's a pretty straightforward one. When will tank single missions be added? Hi mate, they're on our to-do list, but they're not a priority, so no ETA yet. We'll try to make them as awesome as possible though. And the last serious question comes from Extopia Gaming. If I kill a tank, can I have 5 million golden eagles? No. By the way, did you notice that this question sounds remarkably like a line from some amazing 1980s B action movie? That's it for today, but feel free to write your questions in the comments below. We do read them all, and you might see some of them answered in the next episode. If you like what we're doing, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. See you on the shooting range.